Welcome to the only channel on YouTube where if you don't like the video, we'll give you your money back. Come on. All right, here we go. This is a good encounter. It's a full visual. I think you're going to like this. The writer says, I wanted to reach out to you regarding an encounter with an unknown animal that I experienced yesterday, April the 8th, 2019, at about 1900 hours. Although it was brief, it was an encounter I will never forget. You can tell from the date how far I'm reaching back and getting encounter stories. That's how far behind I am. But I'm going to get to all of them. My family and I traveled to Michigan for a vacation at a lake house that we rented out. The lake is in the middle of nowhere. The closest town is approximately 20 miles away. My family was in the backyard by the pool. I decided to walk across the street by myself to a slow-moving river that is full of lily pads, frogs, and largemouth bass. I took my fishing pole with my hollow body frog on it, hoping to land a nice-sized fish. The river itself is not very wide, about 10 feet across and maybe 4 feet deep in the center. Across the river is a thick undergrowth, trees and bushes that leads back to miles of wetlands and forests and prairies. I had been fishing for about 20 minutes when my line became tangled. I took a few seconds to undo the little knot that had occurred. During this time, I looked across the river into the tree line towards my 2 o'clock for really no reason at all, and when I did this, I saw a branch of a bush move back into place as if something was holding it back to be able to see through it. What happened next is something that I cannot explain. A large bipedal... Hank! Can you just be quiet for a few minutes? Stop it! What happened next is something that I cannot explain. A large bipedal figure stood up, already facing away from me, and took 2 steps back into the thick forest. The sun was glistening off the reddish-brown hair that covered its back as it moved away from me through the trees. I could see muscle movements beneath its hair. My first thought was, that's a really big person. And my next thought was, what in the world is a person doing over there, and why is he watching me fish? My third thought was, why is this massive person covered in that strange hair? At that moment, I felt the need to call out, hey, who's in there? But there was no response. I struggled to make sense of the situation. Having spent about a decade hunting and being an avid doorsman, I started thinking, was it a deer? No, I've seen plenty of deer. Was it something else, a fox or an elk? I've seen plenty of those when I lived in Colorado. A bear? Absolutely not. I was out of possibilities. Having gone through the police academy and working as a police officer, I'm trained in observation and attention to detail. This figure was large. Its back was very wide, leading up to extremely broad shoulders, which led up to almost no neck at all. Its head was shaped like a cone, coming to a soft point at the top. The weirdest part, besides it watching me without me knowing, was that it made absolutely no noise at all as it took 2 massive steps back into the wilderness. The length of its strides were incredible. It would take me, I'm 5'9", about 6 steps to cover the amount of ground that it took in 2 steps. Its motion was fluid and effortless. If I were to walk through there, I would be struggling with thorns, getting stuck in my rear end, and sticks stabbing me in the face. It would not be pleasant. However, this creature did it with zero problem, and it did it very quietly. I would also like to add that I felt no sense of danger from this creature. If it was in fact observing me, then it was doing just that, observing me, almost as if it was curious about what I was and what I was doing. The second my attention turned towards the creature, it wanted nothing to do with me, and it made its steady retreat back into the wetlands. Whoa, full visual. You actually saw the whole full body of this creature. I think that's unique. I think that's a unique experience. And I don't know if you ever thought about Bigfoot before this or not. You don't really mention it, but I can't explain how crazy excited I would be if I were to look across and see a Bigfoot on the bank, other side of a lake or a river, just looking at me. I think I'd wave at it. I don't like, hey, what's up? But anyway, that's an awesome encounter. Thank you very much for sending it. Let's go to another one. This is an encounter that was sent to me, I think, back last February or March. It's been a long time. And I've got a few that go back that way, and which brings up a point. I want to let you know there's a lot of people have sent encounter stories in, and you haven't heard them yet, but I just have a lot to do, and I'm reaching back, coming forward, and trying to kind of spread it out and make it interesting and even. And I'm going to get to yours if you've sent it, so stand by, just be patient. Nobody's being impatient, by the way. I'm just saying that because I can imagine people would be going, well, I sent that story in, I've never heard it, just hang tight, it's coming. But this was written by, the author's name is Scott, and the encounter was experienced by him and his brother James. And he writes, my brother and I love to backcountry camp in the Shenandoah Mountains, nestled in the soft rolling ranges of Virginia. We had a spot we picked out years earlier that was about a mile from the nearest fire break. Each year we would haul out just a little more equipment to make the experience more comfortable. We never brought any guns or hunting equipment because we were into it just for the enjoyment of the clean air, the views, the quiet, the sights and sounds of the various animals. On an afternoon in 1976, we headed to our spot for a nice weekend in the woods. As usual, we stopped at the ranger station before we drove up Skyline Drive to let them know where we would be camped. At the time, the rangers informed us that the bear population had increased to about 1 bear per square mile. We looked at each other and were thinking, that's a lot of bears. But that didn't stop us. We drove about halfway into the park to a little fire break we knew of, near our favorite camping spot, and started hauling everything to the site. It took us 2 trips about a mile into the woods. The camp was incredible as it abutted a natural overlook that had a sweeping view of the Shenandoah Valley. At night, from a rock outcropping, you could see the faint lights of some farmsteads way down below and a bountiful starry sky above our heads. We just sat out there on the rocks and talked, laughing and listening to the great music while sipping Hennessy. We were feeling quite peaceful after finishing off about half of the Hennessy and thought it was time to hit the sack. We walked a short distance back to the campsite. The food cooler was tied high in a tree, a good distance from the campsite so as not to entice any bears. At the time, we had noticed that it was very quiet. We could no longer hear the buzzing of the locusts. Even the faint breeze from the cliff seemed to die off. Thinking it was strange, we then settled in and were talking to each other from tent to tent, laughing about whatever came to mind. Then we heard the sound of a very large branch breaking nearby. You could tell it was a thick branch from the low-pitched thunk it made. Something big broke that branch off. It seemed like the entire forest became even more quiet. We acknowledged what we had heard quietly and were anticipating the sounds of some creature walking around the woods after that. Soon, another branch cracked, and this time it was closer. We didn't say a word, and we listened intently. James whispered that it was probably a bear. I wasn't so sure because what I heard next sounded more like a bipedal creature. I definitely heard what seemed to be footfall of 2 large feet crunching the leaves. If it was a bear, you would be able to hear multiple footfalls through the leaves. We had previously seen and heard enough bears that we could tell the difference. At that point, we were transfixed with fear, just waiting for what might happen next. The creature picked up its pace and ran towards my tent. Whatever it was stopped just on the other side of the fabric. I softly said, "James, is it at my tent?" He didn't reply. I heard a soft grunt outside my tent, and then the grunt changed to kind of a snort and then back to grunting again. I was guessing that it was a bear and hoped it would move on since the food was tied off in a tree. I kept as still as a statue while this thing was only a foot or two from me outside the fabric. My brother's voice suddenly pierced the air, saying, "Okay, whoever you are, we have a gun and we're going to shoot you. I swear we will shoot you." Thank God he said something. I thought I was going to die of a heart attack or this thing was going to charge through my tent and snatch me and I would never be heard from again. James then repeated his threat. Whatever it was started to slowly back up and away from my tent. It was definitely a heavy creature walking on two legs. We heard the steps fade into the distance and the forest became quiet again. We never got out of our tents either, possibly foolishly thinking they were providing some protection. I don't know how I ever got to sleep that night, but I did. At the time, I had never heard of Sasquatch, so that idea never occurred to me until many years later. I passed off that experience for decades until I started hearing about and researching Bigfoot. Then the experience came flooding back about the weird sounds of hearing such a heavy two-legged creature back then. I always assumed it had to be a bear, despite what I clearly heard and remembered. However, the idea that we could have encountered a very different creature so many years ago was apparent when my research discovered that there were Bigfoot encounters in the Shenandoahs, even as far back as the 19th century. Thinking about it now still gives me shivers, not knowing what we really encountered so long ago, and that we made it out of those woods alive to tell the story. I have not backcountry camped again since then. I wonder if you're depriving yourself of some really, really good times in the woods. I mean, that was 1976. That's a long time ago. If you haven't been backcountry camping since then, I understand. I understand. Apparently the thing wasn't aggressive. I don't know. I kind of hate to say this stuff because it didn't happen to me. So I don't know how I'd react. But I just hate hearing people just totally giving up something they love because of one of these encounters. And it makes me kind of sad. You know, Carrie Arnold, who operates the Bigfoot Odyssey channel, Carrie wouldn't go into the woods for many years after his encounter, and I talked to him, and you all have probably heard him say that he's pretty much overcome that fear. He's not gonna let that encounter dictate the rest of his life. And I've actually seen videos on his channel where they're out in the woods. I think he threw up a live video not too long ago of him and the Sisters of the Moon, who I love those girls. Those girls are so cool. He was out there with them. They were camping and having a great time, laughing, and he was panning his phone around and showing them. So anyway, the point is that this is a great story, and it's probably pretty typical. I've heard several of these where people are camping, they hear something outside their tent. The stories are awesome. But they're okay. The creature or whatever it is didn't show any aggression or hurt them, and then they just quit going to the woods. And again, if it happened to me, I might be exactly the same way. I'm not making a judgment. All I'm saying is it just breaks my heart when people, especially these two brothers, I mean, they obviously loved each other. They love being out in the woods. Man, going out in the that is a beautiful place to be. Being out there on a starry summer night, sipping some Hennessy, man, it just doesn't get any better than that. And I hope if he hears me say this that he'll consider going back, even 76. I'd have to do a calculator to see how long ago that was, but it's like 40 years ago. You know, you're probably a 60 or 70-year-old man right now. Man, you ought to go back to the Shenandoah area and camp out some night. If your brother's still with you, give him a call and maybe just say, "Hey man, let's go see let's go do it again." Because anyway, I just love people and I want them to be happy, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. Boy, did I ramble on or what? Some of you guys said you wanted to hear me talking. Well, there you go. There you go. All right. That'll do it for that one. Thanks, James. Or excuse me. Thanks, Scott, for the encounter. It was awesome. This is a good one. This is a Bigfoot encounter, and heck, it's almost like it would be a good script for a scary movie or something. I loved it, but it's really good. Anyway, here we go. I grew up in Reno, Nevada in the 60s. I was the fifth child in a family of 9 kids. I watched both of my parents work very hard to put a roof over our heads, clothes on our back, and food in our stomachs. And if we wanted anything beyond that, we had to work for it. My claim to fame was babysitting, and most weekends my dance card was full. I was confident in my abilities as a babysitter. I was only 11, and people trusted me to care for their little ones. My life-altering experience took place while providing my services in the fall of 1966. During that time, Reno was considered one step above a cow town. It was not uncommon for folks to ride horses through our downtown area. My babysitting assignment was located in a small track house located in a rural area on the outskirts of Reno. It was surrounded by horse pastures and sturdy fences. One night, I had already fed the children, bathed and dressed them snugly in pajamas, and took them into bed. I was good. After they quieted down to sleep, I had some me time, which was typically spent playing with their mom's makeup. I was still a kid, after all. While I was having fun trying to copy the looks of Marilyn Monroe or Audrey Hepburn, I heard something in the bathroom window, which faced the small backyard. And then came the sound. It was a noise that I would try to duplicate for my brothers and sisters, but never could get it quite right. It was a back-of-the-throat, rapid, somewhat tense, yet strangely playful gurgling sound. It wasn't human, but it had a weird human voice quality. I instinctively dropped to my knees and began crawling down the hall, past the kids' bedroom, and to the kitchen. While still on my knees, I opened the knife drawer and felt around for the biggest knife I could find. Now that I was armed, I stood up waving the knife wildly so that whatever this thing was would see that I was not going to be easy prey. I hurried to lock every door, draw every curtain, and then I sat on the couch in the dark, clutching my weapon. Total silence. Did I imagine the sound? It was too weird to be real. My gripping hands and stiffened back began to relax when my ears were alerted by jiggling of the kitchen doorknob, softly at first and then more intensely. There was a pause followed by the same sound at the living room door, only this time it began to rattle with more vigor. There was one door left, the front door, the door that shared a wall with the children's bedroom. I crawled to their room and pressed my ear to the exterior wall, trying to discern the sounds of any outside activity. And again, it was only silence. And then it began, only this time it was violent. It began with a doorknob jiggling, then a stomach-churning, pounding, pushing sound against the last door. I couldn't take it anymore, so I picked up the phone and I called the police. Thankfully, during this era, you could get anywhere in Reno in about 3 minutes. They arrived quickly with the sirens blaring. They even had a dog, with flashlights drawn and an eager canine straining on its leash. They started at the bathroom window. They traced very large and deep footprints going in the exact path that I described. The last dirty prints were at the front door. The noise of the police car siren must have alerted my would-be assailant that I was no longer alone, and that's when the footprints backtracked, went through the yard, the horse pasture, over a fence which showed a fresh break. The sound has haunted me for years. In 2014, I stumbled on a YouTube post entitled Bigfoot Sounds in the Sierras. Reno is closely bordered by that particular mountain range, so this piqued my curiosity, and there it was, that sound, that weird sound. It was otherworldly sound that I could never forget, and now is described as Bigfoot samurai chatter. In that moment, as I listened, I was set free to realize that it did really happen. There was really something there to get in, and according to the police, it was big, heavy, and curiously, for a cold fall night, wasn't wearing shoes. These creatures were living in my backyard, and one or more of them just might have happened upon a small house where a little girl was trying to earn some spending money babysitting. Can I prove it was Bigfoot? I don't need to. What else could have made that unique, bizarre sound, left those large, deep footprints, and broken down a fence strong enough to keep a horse in? I have been hooked on Bigfoot Sasquatch reports ever since. Thanks for your work. I'm a new subscriber, and I hope you enjoyed my story. Man, that was a great story. What'd I tell y'all? Didn't I tell you that was scary? Heck, it scared me reading it. It scared me narrating it. I can just see this 11-year-old little girl in a house with 2 or 3 little kids she's babysitting, and here's this this crazy, weird chatter that these things supposedly do. And then it starts trying to get in the house. I mean, what in the world does it want? I don't, it's crazy. It's just crazy what these things do sometimes. And anyway, yes, we did enjoy your story. I know everyone is sitting on the edge of their seat, terrified at what happened to you in 1966. Wow, that was a ways back. But it's a great story. You did a good job writing it, and thank you very much for sending it. We all enjoyed it. Thanks. Okay, that's it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Thanks.